So what about Agile, right? Agile's like the big thing today. Everybody's talking about Agile, right? And Agile really works well in terms of mitigating incremental risk, okay? So I'm pulling out an example of the largest Agile project globally that started in 2011, right? And it was for a universal credit program. And basically it's a welfare program in Britain where they're replacing the entire welfare system for the country. All right. They released, I think, what is it, $78 billion a year in benefits. They're doing a full modernization. They procured it purely as an Agile project. Right? They started out, they made the announcements, did all the procurement documents, pure Agile. They wanted to have that incremental piece moving forward. And they hired an SI team that was combined of HP, Accenture, Capgemini, and IBM. Those were the players that came to the table and we're going to be deploying that component. So they started to get into it, and about 9 months in, they had to convert it back to a waterfall project. Because part of the difficulty is that the contracting mechanism, similar to California, is not written for Agile. It's written for waterfall. And until that there is a mandated change within the language of a contract, it still works in a deliverables-based, waterfall base, right? So that was tripping point number one for them, okay? Because they didn't change their contracting mechanism. Number two is the government of Britain worked very much within this sort of centralized command and control structure, right? Approval of documents, approval of iterations, design, all the different elements associated with the development of the system. There was this very rigid control process that was laid on top of the Agile model. And Agile doesn't work with that type of tight control. It actually violates the entire premise of Agile, right? And so the original budget was $2 billion to put the system in. The final cost in 15 was $12.8 billion, 6 times. And I'm not trying to throw Agile under the bus. That's not the whole point. Because Agile does work. It does work very well in the right circumstance. It's not a panacea. Just because you do Agile doesn't mean now you've relieved the woes of system implementation. Agile doesn't fix that. Agile's just another, you know, first it was waterfall, then it was spiral, you know, RUP methodology. Now it's Agile, you know, it's just the evolution of methodology. It is not the solution. It is just the way you do it, right? But there are still interdependencies that Agile needs in order to understand whether or not it's the right method. And if you procure in a way that it can't run correctly, then you're not going to get the benefits of Agile, as an example. Right? And there's more. There's a lot of talks today, and different people were talking about it today. Right? So here's part of the problem, right? Is that you have all these different players within the context, right? And a lot of the systems today within government, you know, and this is not a California-centric issue, is that they're built around products and static transactions, right? A very structured flow of transaction and a product that does X, Y, and Z. And it's not built around the model that's most used today, which is called continuous delivery. And continuous delivery depends on the behavior of your subscriber, right? So I'll give you an example, like Amazon is continuously evolving its platform, okay? And they're evolving the platform based on the fact of how are my suppliers behaving and how are my consumers behaving by segment, right? So if you like boots, leather boots, right? And there are suppliers of leather boots within Amazon, like you can go online and say, hey, you know, who are these different people? Within Amazon, there's this nexus point that they have that they calculate when it's more beneficial for them to become the direct supplier of boots in the marketplace rather than leveraging third-party providers. And so what they'll begin to do is then buy inventory, store the inventory, and those third-party providers are now starting to get margin erosion based on that activity. Eventually they go away and Amazon owns that part of the market. Right? So they use the data that they're collecting continuously and adjusting the platform continuously based on the behavior of the subscribers that they have on their platform, both suppliers and consumers. Right? And so that's how modern platforms really work today, because it needs that nimbleness to be able to adapt in terms of pricing models and availability. And the traditional model right now within government, and again, this is not a California-centric problem, this is national, is that you have all of these different players that are interacting with each other, and they dump everything into a project, right? They call it a project. We need a project, right? But then the outcome is unknown, because you've got multiple softwares and platforms, you've got processes, rigid technologies. It's all very software-centric, right? But the world doesn't work that way anymore. That's 1985, 1990. The world does not work under that software-centric model anymore, the rigid model anymore. It works on, my strategy changed, my need changed 5 months into this, and it's going to change 4 months after that, and it's going to change 6 months after that. And that adaptability needs to be built into the system itself, because the system enhancements can't come from government anymore in the sense of generating what the enhancement is, outside of like a legislative action or federal action, right? The enhancement has to be tracked through the data captured from the behavior of the citizen who's interacting and you have a relationship with through the tool. Because they're going to change their behavioral patterns in terms of how they work. Because they're working off of, you know, the cell phone environment. They're working off the Netflix, Spotify environment. Right? And so the root cause here is that you've got a lot of static working into a project, where a project is the purpose of what you're doing in the procurement, not the outcome. You're not buying an outcome, right? When I go to Spotify, my outcome is I'm listening to this music. I don't care how you get it to me. I don't care what contracts you have with the recording artist. I don't care what the royalty structure is. I don't care if you're getting sued or not sued. It doesn't matter to me. The outcome is when I go and I look for the music, it pops it up, I add it to a playlist, or I just listen to the song that one time. Right? I want an outcome. I don't care about your process. Your process is irrelevant to me of how you got to that. Right? And it's becoming more and more. So the way people buy is changing, right? The expectations are very high. The failure rate is, you know, there's no room. There's no wiggle anymore, right? You know, I talk to colleagues of mine that are my age, and, you know, 10 years ago, you could go down the path of doing something, and you suddenly realize that maybe that's not the best way to do it, you know, process reengineering or a new project or a new system or whatever. You suddenly realize, that's not going to work. We're going to retool. We're going to back up, and now we're going to shift maybe 5 degrees to the right, and we're going to go in a different direction. Right? You're not allowed to do that anymore. You go down that rabbit hole, it doesn't work, you're done. There's no backtracking. There's no rethinking. The scrutiny is instantaneous. The trolls are all over you. Social media is on top of you. And who gets that? The legislators. And how much does the legislature understand technology and the rhythms of... They don't. It's not their job. Right? Their job is to get reelected and represent their constituency. So all they hear is trolls, media, it's all in my backyard, somebody's got to shut that down. Right? And so there's no room. There's no room to come back. Right? So people want to buy outcomes. They don't want a project. I don't want to buy a project. I want to buy a service that's going to produce this check at this date every single time, and if there's a problem with it, it's not my problem. I want to place a foster child with a foster family. There's a brokering process. I want to match people up. I want to have them do self-service. I want to track the data that's going on in the process. I don't want to do a project. Where's my Match.com for, you know, matching kids to foster families, right? It's out there. Where's my subscription? Right? That's what they're thinking. And they want continuous delivery. They don't want planned obsolescence, saying that we're going to implement a system here, we're going to have to modernize at this point. Nobody wants to modernize. Nobody has the patience to go through the 18 months of modernization anymore. And so what's going to happen is that it's going to be about continuous delivery. How are you taking the feedback from the behavior of the citizens interacting with the tool, plus state staff interacting with the platform, and taking those interactions and understanding where the bottleneck is in the process and simply changing the workflow behind the scenes without a project continuously. So in January, you're having that problem. In March, you have a patch update release into the platform. There was never a project. There was never an upgrade. There was never anything going on, right? Because it's that continuous process that's evolving based on the behavior. Because everybody talks, you know, it's like 5 years ago. Everybody's talking big data, big data, big data. Nobody, you know, and I used to sit in front of, you know, government audiences, and you could tell it's like nobody had any idea. It's like, oh yeah, big data, big data. It's like, I have no idea what that means. I have literally no idea what that means, right? But it's like, yeah, big data, right? Big data means that you are collecting the behavioral patterns of the people who are interacting with your platform every single day, and you're adjusting the platform based on those behavioral patterns, right? That's how you're adjusting the platform, not on what some person in an office thinks they should do for an enhancement. The enhancements are continuous, and they're happening all the time, right? Uber is enhancing the app all the time. Amazon is enhancing the app all the time. It's a continuous process of enhancement. And adaptive, right? And not rigid, right? In the sense of, you know, we can't do that, we can't go there. So there are those things. So everybody, bless you, everybody wants the outcome experience, right? They want ongoing value, they want a great experience involved, right? They want everything on demand, you know? They want to snap their fingers, new function. They want to be able to do it anywhere, mobile, right? And they want it tailored to them as the individual. So in terms of putting things into blocks or bundles of people, that doesn't work anymore. Everybody wants to be tailored to. You have specific interests and needs, right? You're an avid cell phone user. You tailor everything that you want to yourself. You want the relationship you have with whoever you do business with to be tailored to you, what your interests are, what your needs are, right? So this is where the model of system as a service kicks in, right? And system as a service is that inversion of the current model that works today or is in practice today. And the system as a service model says fundamentally this, is that there are no payments to any vendor until the system is implemented and it works. The vendor owns the entire risk of implementation, right? They're 100% for all the costs associated for implementation. There's no progress payments, there's no incremental, you know, payment process, there's no deliverables, there's no stage gates, right? They're responsible for all the technology selection and procurement. How many times have you bought a piece of software and then bought an integration vendor to come in and help you configure that software and suddenly realize that the software isn't going to do what you want it to do? And you're stuck, right? In the system as a service model, the vendor buys that software. If it doesn't work, the vendor dumps it, gets another one. There's no mother may I. Because you're buying an outcome. You're not buying a project. You're not buying code. You're not buying a tool. You're buying a calculation, right? Does it produce the outcome that I want, right? They're responsible for all the hosting in the cloud. They work with the state to build out all the use cases, not requirements. Institute for Software Quality measured that if you do a requirements-based procurement, out the gate, before you've even got the vendor on the ground, you have a 25% deviation in scope, time, and cost. Out the gate. NASA calculated that the requirements phase generates, 30% of all of the bad requirements generate all of the, or just doing requirements-based components generates 30% of all of the error rates within software development. The highest component is in requirements. Right? So buying based on requirements doesn't work because requirements change. And that's a change order. And that's a deviation. So requirements are not the end-all be-all, right? So it's building the use case with the requirements, with the business rule, with the workflow, which says, when I test, I'm testing to this outcome. If you had to change 50% of the requirements in there, blah, 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 whatever, you validated the business rule, great. You had to re-engineer the workflow, okay, blah, blah, blah. Did I get the outcome? Because that's what you're buying is the outcome, not the project and the process, okay? And then that includes all the upgrades, maintenance, enhancements included in the subscription fee, because it goes into a subscription model rather than I own, manage, and do all those things. Where the state kicks in, it defines the needs through the use case development process, provides access to the existing systems, responsible for rules, validation, and legislation. Focus on outcome definition, not on process, not on software, not on deliverables, right? I call them hate deliverables. Everybody hates to write them, everybody hates to read them, everybody hates to pay for them. It creates more tension in any project than anything else. There's no value. I've never seen a project management plan that made the project go better, or a design document that made the system go better, ever, right? And everybody hates to go through the process, right? And it adds layers and layers of complexity and cost to the delivery mechanism, right? And so where the state is that they get committed to a multi-year subscription model rather than having to own the entire outcome, or the system. They own the outcome, right? And so one financing piece around it works this way, right? If you take a look at it, and what this provides the state is flexibility in the sense of how it can pay for things, right? Because it's like leasing a car. It's like leasing anything else that you have. There's multiple financing models, right? So under a traditional approach, you're looking at maybe a $3 million project that, you know, based on industry average deviations of 10 to 40%, it's 3.3 to 4.2. Usually you're paying 20% M&O on any system that you put in. It can be a little higher, it can be a little lower, it depends on what you're doing. So let's say roughly $600,000 a year on a $300,000 project. So over, let's say that, you know, 4 years of M&O plus your implementation process, your base estimate's about 5.4 million, but when you put in your low to high deviations, you're looking at 5.7 to 6.6 million. That's your total cost of implementation plus 4 years of M&O, right? Under a system as a service model, there's no implementation cost, none. The vendor does not get paid for this. They have to prove it works. When I go to the car dealership and I sit in the car, it turns on, the brakes work, the lights work, the radio works, it has to work. When I go buy a house and a track home, it has to work. The pilot light has to work in the whatever and the whatever and the whatever, right? But then what happens is that the cost gets distributed into M&O as a subscription agreement rather than as an implementation cost. So in essence, you're not doing a project, you're leasing a system. How it works, again, you know, the model works in different ways. You can have the vendor come in and do M&O support, and they should be doing this at no cost, right? Because at this point, they're extracting processes, they're documenting use cases, they're working out the business rules out of the system. Once those things are approved and work with the state and saying, hey, this is how the use case works, this is how the rule set works, because your use cases then become your test model. It's a one-to-one. Your use cases become your test cases, right? You do the validation. At this point, then the vendor goes into their agile sprint cycle, and they're showing progress every 2 to 3 weeks on what they're doing to configure. And they're picking the tech, and they're picking the coding, and they're picking the software, and they're picking the database structure, and they're picking out all those things based on efficiency, because at the end of the day, when the system goes live for that M&O period, if it works on day 1, great, but day 127 there's a problem, the state does not own the problem. The vendor owns the problem. The vendor does not get paid on day 127 under their 4-year agreement if the system is not working. If my cable service doesn't work, I don't pay. If my Netflix doesn't work, I don't pay. Because right now, the current model, the state owns 100% of the risk. You are not buying outcomes. You are buying projects. And you do not know the outcome. You're hoping. Hope is your strategy right now, right? Based on the metrics that we saw earlier. So I'm out of time. So just keep in consideration that you want to maximize your outcomes. You want to buy outcomes. So I'll challenge you to do one thing at some point, right? It's all on your own. The next time that you sit down with a vendor who comes in and promises you this and tells you about that and offers you how great their product, their service, their infrastructure is, ask them, okay, if I buy you, I'm not going to pay you until you implement it and show me that it works. If they run away, what does that tell you? What does it tell you? Does it tell you that the vendor believes in the outcome, in the solution that they're pitching to you? Or were they just simply hoping that you were going to pay them incrementally until either the money ran out, or the time ran out, or they were going to change order you, or they were going to do something else to you? Because if they're as good as they say they are, and they think they are, they'll say, sure, you bet. We'll implement it. We'll produce the sandbox. We'll validate. I'll show you that this works. If they run away from that, that's your first red flag. And it's a big one. It says, if they don't believe what they're selling me, why should I buy that, right? It's like buying a car from somebody, and, you know, are you willing to pay to manufacture the car before I buy it? No, no, no. You have to give me all the money up front, so then I'll go manufacture the car for you, right? No, I wouldn't do that. Nobody would do that. So that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you this morning. I appreciate your time and attention. I know you were only on your first cup of coffee. It's a tough role. So, and I'm available for questions if you have anything.